first one is time ordering. Does X come before Y? Because when we infer that one event or one phenomena influences another phenomena, we assume that one event precedes another one in time. X in this case is going to be the cause. Y is going to be the effect. X is the cause. Y is the effect. It's called time ordering. Does X come before Y? Now, the real cause of the crime is temperature. Does temperature come before the crime? Well, what we'd have to do is we would have to record the temperature and then record the crime rate. And what we would see is that when the temperature went up, there was an increase in crime rate either that day or the next day, and we could argue that there was a time ordering relationship. Next, is there an alternative cause? Is there an alternative cause between temperature and crime? Yeah, there are other reasons why people commit crimes besides temperature. But the question is whether or not temperature influences it. And temperature probably does have somewhat of an influence on it. At the very least, it creates the necessary conditions for crime to take place because people go outside, they have more contact with one another. On another level, when people are hot, they're more agitated, and they're more quick to anger, and more quick to commit crimes. Question 3, are X and Y regularly associated with one another? So what we should see is a correlation. Whenever there's a temperature, there should also be crime. And that should happen at a greater than chance rate. That is, it should happen more often than we would expect just by chance. The best way to understand chance is if you flip a coin 100 times, approximately 50 times it'll come up heads, and approximately 50 times it'll come up tails. Well, there's a certain point at which if you get too many heads, you got more heads than you would have gotten by chance. So it happened at a greater than chance rate. And this is the way that statisticians evaluate cause. Is we look at two events, and if two events are associated with one another at a greater than chance rate, we say that there's a reliable connection between the two of them. There's a correlation. But in this case, the alternative cause of ice cream and crime was heat. The alternative cause of ice cream and drowning was temperature. Heat, same thing, right? So you should always think about these things. Just because one thing, probably the best example here, and it's going to sound like I have a liberal bias. There's a lot of people who say, oh, Obama is president now, Obama is responsible for the economic situation that we're in. Now, I'm just going to relate to you the argument on the other side based upon causal reasoning. The causal argument here is that it's called a post hoc fallacy. Just because Obama is president and the economy got worse doesn't mean that Obama caused the economy to get worse. There could be another cause out there, so we always have to ask these questions. Does X come before Y? Well, did Obama happen before the economy got bad? Well, it fails on the first test. Because we already had rising unemployment before Obama was president. We already had massive deficit spending before Obama was president. TARP happened before Obama was president. The auto bailout started before Obama was president. He continued the policy. So X, in fact, came before, well, the cause became, or the outcome came before X. So X did not come before Y. The other one is there an alternative cause? Well, the alternative cause is the financial crisis. It's not Obama's presidency that caused our financial difficulty. Of course, these things are all open debate. I'm just telling you that this is one causal line of reasoning that you can use. No, it's the financial crisis. Are X and Y regularly associated with one another? That is, every time there are a Democratic president, do we also have a reduction in the economy? There you have to ask that question too. Is it true that every time there's a Democratic president, there's an increase in deficits? Actually, the reverse is true. Most of our deficits in the last 30 years have come under Republican administrations. So there's not a correlation, a consistent over time between Democratic presidencies and deficits if you look at the data. So that's a post hoc fallacy. We can evaluate these public arguments by these means. And of course there are other arguments too, but I only use these to illustrate. And I will occasionally have a liberal bias because I tend to pay more attention to those arguments and be more convinced by those arguments, to be quite frank. And I'm willing to talk about that with anyone. Testimony, credible experience or judgment of another. Remember I told you there are 3 kinds of artistic rhetorical proofs. What are they? Three kinds. Greek words. Remember? Ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is credibility of the person or the source. Pathos is emotion. Logos is reason. When we've been talking about things like causal reasoning and sign and analogy, we're in the world of logos. We're talking about words and the way in which words relate to persuasion. But then, of course, there's also credibility. Now, sometimes the best thing to do is just to find somebody who knows more than you do. Find a credible source and use that credible source as the source for your argument. So just repeat what they say. So I can say that indeed, the credible experience or judgment of another. So for example, if I were to talk about, I don't know, yeah, let's say we talk about the collapse. I've got all politics on the mind. I need a different example to give. Divorce rates, right? Divorce rates. How do we know what divorce rates are? You know, no one of us has access to that data individually. No one of us can go out there and find out what a divorce rate is. But we can go to some sources that know. There are think tanks that study divorce rates. Well, you know, the General Social Survey, which is a sociological study that's done on a regular basis. The census studies divorce rates. And those researchers at those organizations do that research. And they may claim, they may draw a conclusion from their data that divorce rates are at crisis proportions, okay? So we can cite researchers at the General Social Survey say that divorce rates have achieved crisis proportions. Now the claim here is that divorce is a crisis. The evidence is just a repetition of the claim, because that's what testimony is. It's really just a repetition of the claim. The only reason why we would ever believe it is because, in fact, we have a credible source. In this case, it's going to be the General Social Survey, a bunch of sociologists who do a regular study. And they're, you know, they're PhDs and they do research, and that's all they do. They sit in poorly lit rooms and they hunch over their computers and analyze data. Is the source trustworthy? That's one of the questions that we would always ask about the source. So, the people at the General Social Survey, are they trustworthy? We can ask that question. It may or may not be the case. In most cases, they're just academics trying to get tenure, so they operate according to the scientific method as much as possible. But there are other sources that we could look at and we could say, that source is not trustworthy. So, you know, if we were to say that, and now I'm going to go back to politics, if we were to say that, you know, if we were to look at the administration's rhetoric, like if we were to look at President Obama claiming that the Republicans have caused the economic crisis that we're experiencing, and we were going to use that as the sole source. We were just going to say, okay, Republicans caused the crisis. President Obama said, you know, on this day, Republicans have driven the economy into the ditch. Then we could ask a question about trustworthiness. And we could ask it on a lot of levels, but the most important level is we have to ask the question, does the source have an interest in the argument? In this case, we can argue quite clearly that Obama has an interest in blaming the other party for the economic problems that we're experiencing, and so we can say that source is not trustworthy. So just on testimony alone, we'd have to go the next step and we'd have to analyze the evidence that was used in the testimonial supporting material. So is the source trustworthy? Do they have an interest? Do they have integrity? Have they lied before? Question 2, is the source knowledgeable? Is another question. Is the source knowledgeable?